to see you. Well, I still remember this phone call like it was yesterday. I was on the phone with a dear friend, and she was across the country. And I'll never forget these 4 words that she said over the phone with such a deep desperation. She said, "I just want peace. I just want peace," is what she told me over the phone. And it was surprising to me because knowing her situation, I thought to myself, that's all you want? Like, if I was in your situation, I'd want a better health diagnosis. If I was in your situation, I'd want more money. I'd want a better living situation. And I'd want a friend in town to be with me during this hard time. But no, she said, "Lisa, I just want peace." And that's what she cried out for. And I think that's so powerful because it speaks to how deep peace is a longing for us. No matter if chaos, as Steve prayed, no matter if there's chaos in our life right now, no matter if there's just mess everywhere or even inside, we cry out, "I just want peace." And there might be some of us that say, "Oh, I think I'm doing pretty good. I feel at peace and things aren't so bad," but if you were to ask somebody else, "Hey, are you at peace?" I mean, might be what you're really looking like. You're not fooling anybody. You're like, "Oh no, I'm fine." Really? Because this is the energy that you're giving off. This is what we're feeling. Love that movie, by the way. Worry, fear, and anxiety, it hits us all, doesn't it? To some level. And I just pulled a few stats off the World Health Organization website, and these are sobering. It says in 2021, 359 million people in the world had an anxiety disorder, making anxiety disorders the most common of all mental disorders. So on a global level, nearly 1/3 of adults experience an anxiety disorder at least one time in their life. And although highly effective treatment is available, only about 1 in 4 people will receive help for their anxiety disorder. Now, I know that anxiety doesn't affect us all on the same level, not as intensely or not as excessively, but even if it does or does not, we know people in our life whom it affects. And I'm deeply aware that among us today, that could be your reality right now as you're sitting here in the service. So some of us might not be crippled by this, but some of us, it might feel like, this is an ongoing battle. It's to be open with you, it's not a battle in the intense and excessive battle that I face. But I face other battles, and that's the truth for many of us here. And so I say all this because the last thing I want is to be some pastor standing up in front of you today who's not a mental health professional and giving you, some thoughts from Scripture and say, just believe the Bible, just believe God, and all will be better. Because that is so not true. And that's the last thing that I want to come across today. So approaching this topic is delicate, and I hope to bring a spiritual perspective to this conversation today. Our human body is, maybe we can, I don't know, do we have a blank screen after that? That's good. Let's do that one. That was getting me anxious to turn and see him. Whew, okay. Anxiety's gone for a second. Where was I? Our human body is masterfully designed. We're incredibly complex and complicated, aren't we? And we're a blend of emotional and physical and spiritual and relational aspects of who we are, and they all go together. And so when it comes to addressing the chaos of our life, when it comes to wanting to seek peace in our life, there's a whole host of things that we can do to help pursue peace. Here, I'm just going to name a few of them that are helpful and really, really good. Exercise. Helpful, really, really good. Nutrition, sleep, an unhurried life. If you're able to have margin in your calendar, that's helpful in pursuing peace. Seeing a doctor, a therapist, or a psychiatrist can be very helpful and very good. Medication can be very helpful and very good. A good support system, deep breathing, grounding techniques, EMDR, all these things can be very helpful, deeply good. Exploring the underlying issues and causes of what gets at the root of our anxiety, deeply helpful, very good. But today, since we're in church, I'd like us to look at this pursuit of peace through the lens of faith and our journey of following Jesus. Because who better knows us than Jesus, right? He created us. He knows us. He's very attentive to us. Even if it sometimes feels like he's not, he's deeply aware of every single factor that is affecting how you're experiencing life today. So as we move into this conversation, one-way conversation through our study of Philippians today, I want us to think about this key idea. And this key idea is this: knowing peace is both a person and a practice. Knowing peace is both a person and a practice. To come to a place to experience deep soul peace, I think, first of all, it includes the one who embodies peace, and that's Jesus. And some of my favorite words that Jesus ever said was to his disciples, and he said, "Peace I leave with you, and peace I give to you. I do not give as the world gives. Do not let your heart be troubled, and do not be afraid." Folks, we have a Jesus who says, "I don't desire for you to have a troubled heart. I don't want you to live in fear." And he really wants us to know the peace that is in him. So it's a person, but it's also a practice, meaning it takes our participation. We can't just expect peace to be downloaded into us if we know Jesus. I know Jesus, so I should know peace. No, it's a practice. It's something that we have to join God in. Now, I know sometimes in life, God is merciful and he'll just download you with some peace when you need it, and that's happened. But as a whole and normally, it doesn't happen like that. It's a lifelong journey for many. And you're like, really? A lifetime? There are these two men that I deeply, deeply respect. I'd consider them friends and mentors. Both of these gentlemen are in their 70s. Both of them have just done incredible kingdom work in the area of renewal and healing. Both have deeply affected me in my journey of healing. Respect them much. They're kind of the people that when you're just like near them, you just feel like their aura of peace just kind of covers you, you know, like a peaceful, calm lake in the morning. And you just want to say, "Can I just have what you're having?" Like that feels really good. But something that I've learned about both of them is that they both have struggled with anxiety their entire lives. And not just mild anxiety, but significant anxiety. In fact, one of them, during a time of serving as a pastor in a thriving church, had a mental breakdown and had to be admitted into a psych ward. And that's become part of his story. And from there, he received recovery and renewal and launched a healing ministry that affects thousands of people today. So when it comes to this idea of pursuing peace in our life, for some of us, the reality is it is an ongoing journey of participating with God and putting in the practice. So knowing peace is a person and it's a practice. Well, today we're going to continue on in Philippians, and we're in chapter 4. Woo! We're on the home stretch. Chapter 4, everybody. This is the last one. And as the chapter opens up, Paul kind of calls some people out. And he opens up with describing that there is a disagreement among the people in the church of Philippi between two women. Imagine that. Two ladies are having a disagreement. And apparently it's caused such trouble that Paul, all the way in Rome, got word of it probably from Epaphroditus, who came over to talk to him, and he's putting it in the church letter to address the congregation. Now, I would have hated to be one of those ladies whose name was, I was thinking, what if Jill and Lisa were written in a letter for having a feud? We'd be horrified. But it speaks to the degree of how significant this disagreement was. And he said, ladies, you got to figure it out. And he said, and there's someone else that I hope will help you come to an agreement with each other. And then he says something like, I have contended with you in the work of the gospel, meaning you have been teammates of mine, and this is really important to me, that you make the effort to find peace in this situation. And then he says something like, because your names are in the book of life, which tells me he's saying, guys, we're on the same team here, and we're all going in the same direction for eternity with Jesus. So we've got to figure this out because it's hurting the church. So right out of the gate, he addresses a conflict that needs to be resolved. And then from there, he throws in another, rejoice in the Lord, because Paul's got to do that. Give him a reason to rejoice. And then he moves to verse 5, and that's where we're going to pick up today on the screen. Verse 5, he says this, let your gentleness be evident to all, the Lord is near. Now he says gentleness. Now gentleness here is not soft. Gentleness here does not imply it's just an absence of like aggression or harshness. It hopefully does include that, but that's not all that it includes. Gentleness is actually a hard word to translate because it encaptures so many other virtues like patience and humility and empathy and self-control. Some call it meekness. Now, a definition that I ran across that I like is gentleness can be called sweet reasonableness. And I thought, is reasonableness even a word? And it sure is, guys. So it's not just about being reasonable in a situation, and it's not just about being sweet in a situation. It's about being sweet reasonableness or sweetly reasonable. You can say it either way. And that was a definition that I love. So Paul is saying, hey, let your gentleness be evident to all. One priest and theologian of the late 16th and 17th century said this. He said, and I love this, he said, nothing is so strong as gentleness, and nothing so gentle as real strength. His name was Francis de Sales, and he was known for his gentleness. Now, this is noteworthy because this was following the Reformation, and so it was a time that was defined by a deep fracture of Western Christianity between the Protestants and the Catholics. And here was a priest who was a voice for gentleness in this time. He said, nothing is so strong as gentleness, and nothing so gentle as real strength. To exhibit gentleness in its truest form takes an incredible amount of strength. And it's a compelling quality to encounter. In fact, if you recall, gentleness is only one of the two words that Jesus used to ever describe himself. It was gentle and humble in heart, if you remember that. So what could practically this look like? I came up with a few ideas. Let's take a look at what these could be. I don't have to defend or prove myself. Gentleness. I don't have to retaliate or seek vindication. I could release my need for control or powering up. Gentleness. I can respond in a way that dignifies the other, or I can be patient with someone's weakness. Gentleness. Gentleness says, hey, I don't agree with you, but I'm willing to look at this with you and seek peace and understanding because it's not only affecting our relationship, it's affecting the greater community around us. That's what gentleness does. And it totally makes sense that Paul would want to address this after he just addressed this conflict that was going on in the church. Can you imagine the powerful witness? He says gentleness is evident to all. Can you imagine the powerful witness this would have for the Philippian church if people knew this to be true of them? He says, you want to stand out and be different from the Roman Empire? Be gentle. You want to spread the good news of Jesus Christ? Choose gentleness. You want to be at peace with one another? How about sweet reasonableness? Be sweetly reasonable with one another. And then he follows it up with this. He says, let your gentleness be evident to all. And then he says, the Lord is near. Now that could mean two things. It could be one, acknowledging the presence that Jesus is close and that he's with us. True. It also could mean that, hey, Jesus is coming again and he is near and coming. So it could be a right now and it could be not yet. So my question is, why would Paul intentionally put the Lord is near in the middle of let your gentleness be known to all? And then this next section of, let's go to the next verse, where he says this, do not be anxious about anything. Why would he insert that in between these two things? Well, maybe he realizes, and maybe he's wanting us to think about the fact that if we think about how we treat each other, letting our gentleness be known to all, and we think about how we handle our anxieties and worries, maybe that's affected by our awareness of the presence of Jesus in our midst. Maybe that could be why he included it there. So he says, do not be anxious about anything. Now, immediately there might be some skeptics, right, in the room to say, Paul, you sound a little out of touch for these guys not to be anxious about anything, because that's impossible, because I think they have some really good reasons to be anxious, don't you? I think so. They're in the middle of some persecution and pressure from Rome. They definitely have a concern for Paul and Epaphroditus to make it back to them. We've just been made aware of the internal conflict that's amidst them, and they have great uncertainty for what's ahead. So, Paul, why would you tell them not to be anxious about anything? But if anyone has known a life fraught with hardship and suffering, I think it's Paul. Yeah? He's not writing this letter from a plush palace, eating his steak and drinking wine and just being like, hey guys, be anxious for nothing. Remember, he's writing this from prison. And before he went to prison, we have a whole list of things that he's endured. And I got this out of book of Corinthians. Just let's revisit some things that Paul has already gone through in his life. 5 times he received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1, meaning whipped 39 times. 5 times he went through that. 3 times he was beaten with rods, pelted with stones, 3 times shipwrecked, spent a night and day in open sea, has been in danger from rivers, bandits, fellow Jews, Gentiles, false believers, been in danger in the city and the country and at sea, gone without sleep, gone without food, been cold and naked, and faces the daily pressure of his concern for the churches. Those are his words. That guy said, don't be anxious about anything. A guy who's deeply acquainted with suffering and deeply acquainted with uncertainty. So when we hear in this letter from the heart of Paul that he says, don't be anxious, maybe we can guess that he's learned something along the way. Maybe Paul has learned something in following Jesus through all of this that he has to teach us today, and how we handle fear, worry, and anxiety in terms of our relationship with God. Let's keep reading. He writes this, do not be anxious about anything, and then he says this, but in every situation, in some situations, no. He says in every situation, by prayer and petition. And I want you to know petition, that word there means that which is deeply personal to you. So not just any kind of request, but the stuff that deeply matters to you. He says by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, What do we ought to do? Present your requests to God. So he's saying instead of worrying, instead of fretting, talk to God about everything in every situation and ask him for what you need. Ask him for what you personally and deeply need or want. And remember to be thankful and to mention those things to God too. Now, after hearing that, how many of us choose to worry and spin and be anxious anyway? I do. In preparing for this message, do you know how many times I've heard the whisper of God be like, hey, Lisa, how about you talk to me about that? You know, driving. And so it's been so helpful for me just in my own prep to be continually reminded of, say, hey, bring this to God. But I do. I spin at night, 3 a.m. It's the worst. Waking up, I play scenarios in my head, play out the possible angles, fake conversations with whoever, whatever thing's going on. I mean, even worrying if there's enough hot dogs for the church picnic. And then saying, we should have called it a picnic and not a tailgate because technically it wasn't a tailgate, it was a picnic. The stupid, silly things that we swirl about at night. Now, if you're like, Lisa, is that as worse as it gets for you? I'd want what you're having. No, but that's just shared because I know many of us wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning worrying, and it's just not a natural thing to want to talk to God about those things. But what if we learned over time? What if we practiced and learned over time to turn to God in moments like that where we're spinning? At first glance, this might seem maybe simplistic, and it might seem a little Christianese or formulaic. It might even seem shallow or dismissive. And I totally get that, because this verse has been, I think, mishandled a lot over the years as Christians have handled this delicate issue. But to help us with maybe a little of a different perspective, I'm going to reword this verse into a perspective that would help us to think about what are the practices that we're actually doing if we follow what Paul is asking us to do. Okay, so the practices that this verse shows is, number one, being aware of emotions and naming them. Being aware of emotions and naming them. 2, turning to God instead of away. Admitting a need for help. Asking for what you need or want. And expressing gratitude. These are powerful practices to do in our life. And they're helpful when it comes to cultivating peace inside of us and in the world around us. Now, not to get all brain sciencey on you, because I'm also not a neuroscientist. However, there's some things that we've learned about the brain, and I'm going to keep it super elementary, okay? When we sense danger, there's parts of our brains that light up to let us know that, and it activates our bodies to let us know there might be danger. But thankfully, there's other parts of our brain that are able to assess it and let us know if that perceived threat is actually real or not. And then if it's not, our brains also can, other parts activate and help calm us down. It's a beautiful way that God designed our brains. So simply, what sometimes practices like this do is it helps activate those parts in our brain that help calm us down, and actually doing this over a period of time helps rewire our brains to respond differently in situations. It's actually a beautiful way that God designed us, but it takes awareness and it takes practice, and sometimes, admittedly, yes, it takes intervention, okay? So again, I don't want to be overly simplistic on this. But these practices right here, I think, are the heart of what Paul is saying. At the heart of it, it's a beautiful invitation, and I have this in your notes, to connect to a loving God and to deepen a relationship with him, because that's what this does. And I think that's what Paul was saying. Hey guys, when you're worrying and when you're fretting, I want you to turn to God, because this process of bringing everything to Him, of expressing what you deeply need or want, getting that out, and also practicing gratitude will help you connect to the heart of God on a deeper level, because He loves you and He wants to have that relationship with you. Now, I know in a spiritual sense this might be difficult to think about doing. Maybe prayer isn't something we do in our life and you're learning to do that. Let's think about it in the context of a relationship you have with like a best friend or a spouse. Think about your relationship with them and how it would be affected. Could we go back to that other slide here? If this was something we practiced with the relationships in our life that meant the most to us, what if we were aware of our emotions and able to name them with the people in our lives? What if we were able to turn to each other instead of turn away when there were problems and things going wrong? What if we were able to look to our spouse or our best friend or somebody and say, hey, I really need some help right now, and this is a need that I have, and being able to be open and honest to know that there was safety to be able to express that? And what if we would express our gratitude and appreciation for who they are and what they do, and make that a constant practice of thankfulness in that relationship? Now that would affect a relationship, wouldn't it? That would deepen it, wouldn't it? And I think the same goes for when it comes to our relationship with God. That's why Paul is bringing this to the church's attention. So my question is this. How are we doing at inviting God into those spaces in our life? Those spaces of anxieties and unsettledness and fear and worry. When it comes to this list, these practices, how are we doing at this? Can we admit our need for help? That's hard for me to do at times. We live in a very self-sufficient culture. How are we at expressing gratitude and practicing that on a regular basis? This is something that we have to do by an act of faith, isn't it? It's an ongoing act of faith to turn to God and believe that there is something deeply transformational about approaching God in those spaces of worry, fretting, anxiety. But I think Paul knew that through the course of his life and his journey with God that this mattered and that this was powerful, because this is what he says in verse 7. He says this, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, beyond what you could ever imagine about this kind of peace, he said it will do what? It will guard your heart and your minds in Christ Jesus. And he's alluding here to a biblical definition of peace. This kind of peace, like Old Testament word is shalom, this peace that means wholeness and harmony and flourishing. That's peace. Think about it. Like anxiety fragments us. It's like having 47 tabs open in your mind, and one tab is playing a song, and you can't find it. That's anxiety. Worry divides our thoughts. It takes us to the worst. You know, somebody say, hey, I have a PhD in worst case scenarios. I can rock that one. But that's what that does. And so Paul is familiar with the scattering effects of chaos, and he says, but this kind of peace that God wants to give you, this peace is something that brings an opposite effect. It draws us into wholeness. It draws us into harmony, because that's the meaning of a godlike peace, and that's the picture that he says will guard our hearts and our minds, will guard our emotions, will guard our thoughts. He goes on in verse 8, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true. I love this. This is a familiar, beloved verse. Think about what he's saying here. Whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, he says what? Think about such things. This kind of thinking does not come naturally This takes practice. This takes discipline. This takes awareness. This takes constant reminders. This takes people in our life that exude that to help us have thoughts that are geared more towards what would be helpful to us versus what would not be helpful. I couldn't think of a good word. What gives life, what brings death, right? What builds up, what breaks down. This builds up. So what does this all have to do in accessing God's peace? Is this really all you have to do? And again, let me be clear. This is a spiritual practice to help us in our relationship with God. It's not the only thing, though. And we've acknowledged some of that earlier together. So one way to develop a practice in our spiritual formation is when we're experiencing worries, anxieties, to turn to God in every situation. Talk to Him about what we need. Ask Him. Be bold. Don't filter yourself completely raw before God. He wants to know all of that. Be reminded of how He's been faithful to you. Express gratitude. And through that experience, I think you will more deeply come to know the loving presence of God with you that brings peace. That knowing peace is a person and it is a practice. It's a person because we saw many times in these verses just now from Paul, he said, the Lord is what? The Lord is near. And he said, this peace will guard you in what? In Christ Jesus. And then he says, the God of peace will be with you. He constantly acknowledged the involvement of Jesus in this discussion about experiencing peace. And then he says it's a practice. It involves our participation in every situation. Bring our prayers and petitions and gratitude to God. So I think this brings us to a great moment where we can practice this together. Paul said, put it into practice, and the peace of God will be with you. So I'd like to invite Nathan up. If you'll come up, he's just going to play some soft music in the background, and we're going to create some space to try to practice this together. If you picked up notes, it's on the back side of your handout today. I know some of you don't like to journal. That's okay. Or you don't like to write. So this might be something you just do in your heart and in your mind as a prayer. If you're like, ooh, I want to get one of those handouts, there might be some left in the back. You can raise your hand. Maybe an usher or something could help me with that. Does anyone need one? Okay. So here's why I want to do it with you today. I know that after you leave today, you have things to do, places to go, stuff to attend to. So this might be the best chance you have at some uninterrupted time to put this into practice. And the other reason I want us to do this together is because when Paul wrote this letter, he wrote it with the intention of what? It being read to the church collectively as a whole. I think sometimes we just read a letter as it's like written to us individually. No. He told the church, hey, do this. And it was a collective effort. So I thought we should do this together as a church. And then lastly, I think it might be probably way more beneficial for you to practice this than for me to keep talking. And just move aside and allow you to have a chance to engage with God. So this is what we're going to do. I have some prompts that I will walk us through, and we'll just do this for 5 minutes. It might feel, you're like, 5 minutes, that might feel like a long time. We're going to do it. And I just pray, Lord, I ask that a sense of your peace will fill this room, that a sense of your presence will be felt in us and around us during this time. And I ask that you bring to mind and surface what we need to talk to you about, what we need to admit that we want. Help us get in touch with our desire fill us with hope. Remind us of all the things we have to be grateful for. And God, we just give you this time of prayer and reflection. So first, just talk to God about what you feel anxious about. God, I feel anxious about, and just fill it in. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's an area of provision. A scary health diagnosis. Maybe it's something you have to do today that you really don't want to do it. Talk to him and then let him know why you're feeling anxious. You don't have to filter your words. Come as openly and honestly and raw, because your good, loving Father can handle that. And now, where do you need help? What can you ask him for today? God, I ask that you, what is it that your heart deeply wants? Maybe you quit asking because you got so discouraged. I want you to ask again today. May God fill you with hope to ask for that which you might be too scared to ask for. Because you matter, and God cares about what you deeply want. And then I want you just to thank him. Whatever comes to mind that you're thankful for this morning, small or big, just rattle it off in your head as much as you can think about that fills you with gratitude. And if your list is short, that's okay. If it's one thing, that's okay. Lord, I thank you that you are near. I thank you that you are near, and I thank you that you are a gentle, loving God. And all these prayers that fill this room, we offer it to you. And Lord, I ask for your blessing to pour out over each person. I ask for a blanket of peace I ask for hope to rise. I ask that you give us a desire and ability to grow in this area of turning to you and not all the other things we like to turn to when we're sensing worry and anxiety. We ask all this in your powerful name. Amen. So as we close today, what part of you cries out for peace? Where are the areas in your life that you're like, God, I just want to know your peace here? And what can you do about it? There's a very good chance that what you need is way beyond what we talked about this morning. And if that's the case, tell a friend you're struggling, seek help, professional help, talk to a doctor, talk to a counselor. Hey, you have a team of pastors here who love you. Talk to one of us. We want to connect you with any resources that would be helpful. We want to pray with you. But I think that this verse is something that we can really take to heart. And God, we just ask that you help us to be able to practice this week. We have a team at our prayer tables after the service who would just be so honored to be able to pray with you over whatever's on your heart today. So feel free to come forward. Nathan's going to close us in a blessing. And I just asked him to sing this over us today, so just may you be in a posture to receive the blessing that Nathan's going to sing over you, and then he'll dismiss you. Thank you.